Happy Friday, everyone. It's time. It's noon Pacific on Friday. It's time for another Relentless Learning. We do these most Fridays at noon. Usually, every week, we will do a special guest. And every once in a while, we're going to do a little seminar and deep dive on another topic. And today, that's the seminar we're going to do is Understanding HR in the VUCA World. This training and seminar is scheduled for an hour and a half. I'm hoping that will give us time for you to ask some questions and interact a little bit. But first, I want to talk about a little bit of general housekeeping. One of the things that's really interesting about this live event is that it is live and it's streaming through something called StreamYard and through LinkedIn. I cannot see who is attending this event live. It's not like Zoom. So it's a little bit different. And because of that fact, I want to try to keep as much interactivity as possible and make sure that you have your questions answered. If there's some things that you're curious about, any comments that you want to make, you're encouraged to type those questions and comments in the comment section of LinkedIn. And then that way, if you need to, I can answer them at some point in time during the show or after the show. And then the other thing is there's emojis. So if you want to use the emojis, I encourage you to use the emojis during the presentation. I suspect that we're going to have, roughly 30, 40 people who show up for this presentation. So it'd be great to use those. And when I look over the recording, I'll be able to see those. The seminar is accessible live after this live event at any time, using the same website address that you used today to access this live event. And for your convenience, I posted some comments with links to some materials that will be referenced in this particular seminar. I may post some other links later in the comments if there's any requests for other information. So that's where we are today with this particular presentation. And just to give you an example, Andy posted a comment, and then I can show them too. So if there's a certain point in time that if you have a particular comment, the rest of the folks can see them, I can actually put them up on screen. So welcome to Andy from San Mateo, California. I'm just up the road from you. And appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to show up today. In addition to some of the housekeeping issues, I want to also remind people that this is actually sponsored by something called the VUCA MBA. And a lot of people say, what is VUCA MBA? Well, it's two different acronyms, and I want to explain those acronyms briefly. VUCA was something that the military came up with. They come up with a lot of acronyms. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this basically is an acronym and an idea that kind of tells us about the world we live in today. And I think that it's really apparent to us that we live in this VUCA world. And in fact, the world is becoming more and more VUCA every day. I just had a meeting with some friends this morning, and they said, Larry, you got to see this link about this AI robot. And I'm watching this link with this AI robot. Some of you might have seen it. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, things are changing so quickly. And the MBA part of the VUCA MBA stands for Mindset for Business Agility, because I believe that if we have a mindset for business agility, then we will have the opportunity to not only survive in this VUCA world, but thrive in this VUCA world. There are certain ways of looking at the world. There's certain things that we can do that will actually help us. And as human beings, we weren't built for this VUCA world. So there are things that we need to learn. And that's really what my training is about. That's what the VUCA MBA is about. And you saw, if you came in early, you saw some of the testimonials that come up with this VUCA MBA. And so I'm going to show another one in a second, but I want to talk briefly about the shows that we have coming up, because we have 3 guests coming up that are wonderful guests. I'm very excited about what they're going to do, and I encourage you to join me when I do have those guests on. What we do is we talk about 2 big ideas, is what I call big ideas. Erica Lenz is going to join us next week. She's going to present on effective agile adoption requires you to think about change 3 times. March 29th, Chris Sims, some of you are familiar with Chris. He's been around the Agile community for a very long time. He's got a couple small books that he's written that are very influential. He teaches CSM courses, CSPO courses, etc. He's going to present how cognitive bias impacts a Scrum team, especially the product owner. And then on April 5th, we have Clement Kale, who's going to present Empathy Ignites Success. When we champion our customers' success, they will champion ours. And the reason that I'm excited about that is he has quite a following in the world of product development. And so he's going to talk to us more about product development, not just strictly Agile. We get a lot of Agilists here because that's what I do for a living, and I invite people I know, friends, people who have some good ideas. He's going to present those. So that's really exciting. So we got those things coming up. But before we leave this concept of the VUCA MBA, one of the things I want to share with you, I was sitting down and had a nice talk with my friend Tom Malash the other day, and he told me this wonderful story about my training, and I really appreciate that, because I'm sure some of you in your jobs, you're saying to yourself, it's great when I get feedback. It's great, especially when that's positive feedback. People like what I do. I'm a big believer that we all have to eat. We all have to work. So we should do something that we really enjoy, and we should have an impact on the world. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, actually, in this presentation. But Tom has this wonderful testimonial. I wanted to share it with you about the VUCA MBA and the classes that I teach. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the sound.
So we're consulting to the company. We're doing an annual engagement. We have a guy on site full time, and he and I connect every day. And he told me last week, he's like, there's one person in this company who really gets this stuff. And he's like if she wants, I think she could become, a key leader in the Agile initiative. So I'm like, what's her name? He tells me, and I look it up on LinkedIn, and we've connected before. I've always sent out connection requests when I meet clients. They didn't need to do that. We connected before. We connected back in 2020, and in 2020, she took your class, and that's when she reached out to me because we must have me as a guest lecturer in the class, and we talked and exchanged notes, and we haven't re-met until this point in time. But I've run into this before with another client where we bumped into an exceptional person who really gets Agile, and they have been through your training. Just out of the blue now over years. So we're consulting.
So I think that's a wonderful testimonial from Tom. I just wanted to share that with you. That now we get the business part of this out of the way. I want to get into the seminar itself. I do have one thing I want to share with you. If you look above my shoulder here, you're going to see a QR code. If you have your phone, you can take a snapshot of the QR code. It's going to take you to a page that looks something like this page here. On the left, it's a very simple form that you fill out. When you fill out that form, what's going to happen is all I'm going to get is your name and email address. I'm not going to spam you a whole bunch of stuff. What you're going to do is I'm going to send you a digital copy of my latest book called Apke's Golden Rule of Agile, a focus on value delivery. So that's kind of a free gift for you all for joining us, since you had to sit through a little bit of promotion. So I wanted to provide that for you. I want to get into a few things before I take off on the presentation itself. I want to give you some caveats about this. One, I'm not a licensed HR professional. The ideas I'm going to present today, they're really based on my experience and knowledge of practices that I have found and thought about and worked with in many organizations over a decade, helping people become more agile. I've worked with I've been an Agile coach for over a decade. I've worked with a lot of large organizations, large and small, and I see a lot of things that I would consider HR related, and I'm going to talk about a few of them today. Please use the information presented here as a beginning of a dialogue with your HR professionals. If you are an HR professional, and I tried to invite a lot of HR folks that I knew because I figured they'd be interested, then this would be the start of a dialogue with your colleagues. And these are just a few of the ideas that I think of that are HR related, which will facilitate agility within an organization. This list is not exhaustive. There are more things. In fact, when I was going through these, one of the things that I found is I have so many things that I consider HR related. You may not agree, but that I may have a second one of these at some point in time. I want to talk about the presentation today. There's a couple big ideas or main ideas that I want to make sure that we get out of the way. And these are things that I talk about a lot. So any of you, I'm sure we've got some folks who have seen this show before, they've seen my presentations before, they've gone through my classes, etc. These are some really basic ideas that I would consider kind of assumptions going into this presentation. One, the biggest assumption is I believe that the lenses with which we view the world are important. We all see the world differently, and it's really important how we see the world, because that's going to determine how we think about the world, and it's going to determine how our behavior in the world. And those things are all wound up together, but it's really important how we see the world. And when we talk about the VUCA world, it's important that we see it as VUCA, but once we do, we ask ourselves a question: what do we do? Well, agility is the key. We need to understand what agility is all about, which is really our ability to sense the world and make changes quickly, because the world itself is changing all the time. Agility is enhanced when the system under which we work has been optimized for agility. We all work in organizations, and those organizations are systems. And we have, maybe multiple systems within organizations, but there are things that you can do to create a system that is optimized for agility, and that's what we need to do in the VUCA world. And my experience is most organizations operate under systems that are not optimized for agility. So one of the most important, what I would consider systemic issues to address, and we addressed another one in the previous month, which was finance, which is incentives, is what I would consider HR things. Who does the work and how do they do the work? Now, some of you might not consider those HR issues, but that's kind of how I'm going to define it here. And there's different ways of viewing the world of what I would consider HR issues that will improve agility and therefore optimize underlying systems. What does it mean to optimize underlying systems? It means that we will be able to, as I state in Apke's golden rule of Agile, we'll be able to deliver more value to our customers sooner, basically. And that's important. The other thing that's important is we're going to have people who are doing the work who are more engaged in their work. And I think that that's really important as well, that people are engaged in their work, because people who are engaged in their work have more enjoyment in their life. It's a lot of time that we spend in work. We spend, most of us 8, 9, 10 hours a day, 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week, depending on who you are. And I think it's a shame that so many people are not engaged in their work. And that's the reason I got into coaching, Agile coaching in the first place, is to help people become engaged in their work. Now, coincidentally, it helps the organization make more money, because when we have engaged people, we do better work, and we do better work, we have a better chance of making more money. So in this seminar, I'm going to present just a few different lenses into the HR world, and they're my lenses that I'm going to share with you. The first one is near and dear to me. I'm going to talk about what to look for in an Agile coach hire. If you're hiring an Agile coach, what do you need to look for? Because I've seen folks not do a great job of this, not an optimal job of this, and I have some opinions on it. So I'm going to share those with you. I'm going to talk about theory of constraints and how important this is in affecting our hiring decisions. I'm going to talk about the difference between a team and a group of individuals. I'm going to talk about the role of psychological safety and this thing that Google did called Project Aristotle. Hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to talk about why we should end annual reviews, something that I blogged about many, many years ago. I'm going to talk about how knowledge work and knowledge workers are vastly different from what I would consider our default understanding. And I'm going to talk about the role of training in the VUCA world in creating a learning organization. So it's a lot of things I'm going to cover. I'm not going to go into huge depth about any of them, because again, I'm just trying to present you some ideas of things that you should consider. And this should be the beginning. This is not the end. And certainly everything that I say here is debatable. In the VUCA world, I'm showing you what I see in the VUCA world. You may see something different. And just because our visions don't align doesn't mean that either of us is right or wrong. But again, I'm just going to present what I would consider my vision. So the first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about what to look for in an Agile coach hire, because I think it's really important. If you think about it, especially the early on, if you're doing an Agile transformation, you're starting an Agile transformation, it's really, really difficult. And the reason it's difficult is really organizational change itself is very difficult. And so when I've worked with a lot of organizations, a lot of times I'll come in after the fact, after they've tried a transition, sometimes 2 or 3, and I'm sure a lot of other coaches have felt that before. So one of the things that I do see is, because I'm very active in the community, I talk to a lot of coaches, is I spend a lot of time looking at what companies are doing with agility and how they're going about it. And I think there's some ways that you can optimize who you coach or who you hire as far as Agile coaches. So here's some questions that you want to talk to or consider when hiring a coach. I think, and so the first one is, where have you coached and how many places have you coached? I think it's really important that when we're looking, especially somebody who's going to lead a group of coaches or lead an enterprise transformation, you need to have a lot of experience, but it can't just be a lot of experience at one place. It has to be experience in multiple places. And it has to be in sometimes in companies that you would recognize due to their size. Because if you're hiring for an enterprise coach and you're in a pretty large enterprise, you want to make sure that people have worked in larger enterprises before. So that's really, really important. And it's not something that I think that everyone is looking for. And if they are, great. Second thing, I think it's very, very important that coaches are what I consider passionate about what they do. I had a friend of mine just recently said to me, there was somebody that they knew who said it's just a job. And I thought, it's not just a job for me. And for a lot of Agile coaches out there, we are passionate about what we do. And you want to look for coaches who are passionate. And the way that you're going to tell that they're passionate is you have to ask yourself the question, and I think it's an important question: what have you done in the public arena with regards to Agile? And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, take a look at their LinkedIn. Are they posting a lot on LinkedIn? Are they passionate in their posts? Are they trying to help others with their posts? Have they written blogs? Have they written books? Do they have videos? Do they have a YouTube channel? Do they have videos that you can see? Have they done podcasts? Do they have a website? All the best coaches that I know have these things. And the reason that they have these things is they're passionate about agility. So they are passionate about helping others. They're passionate about having ideas that they have out in public, and they're going to be very public. So if you're interviewing a coach and they haven't spoken at meetups, they haven't spoken at conferences, they don't have videos, they don't have anything that you can go back to and look at in the public, then you want to be careful. Because maybe they don't have the passion. Maybe for them, it's just a job. Next question you might want to ask: how many individuals and teams have you trained and coached? One of the things that I've found about agility is that what we're doing, if we do it well, is we're trying to help people see things that they haven't seen before. We're trying to help give them ideas that they haven't had before. And the ability to train others and give them new lenses and new ideas is really, really important. I know a lot of coaches who are good at coaching pieces, and maybe that's what they get hired for. But if you're going to transform an enterprise, you're going to have folks who can train others, I believe. and folks have to be good at communication. They have to be good at training. I know some people who are really knowledgeable about agility, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily are able to do the training piece. And I think, for me, it's a big part of what's necessary. In fact, I believe and have always believed that if we're going to transform an organization, what we need to do is we need to have what I would consider a critical mass of people understand and see things differently. And until we have that, it's going to be really, really difficult because we have a tendency to go back to what we know. So training is a big part. Next bit, it goes back to the passion. Ask them a question. What have you done for the Agile community? Good coaches will give back to the community. Good coaches care about the community. Good coaches mentor other coaches. Good coaches, will do meetups and other events that are free sometimes. And then I think it's really important. What do others say about them? What testimonials and referrals do they have? All the good coaches that I know will have dozens and dozens of testimonials and referrals that you can look back to. So even sometimes on LinkedIn, you can look and there's referrals, but do they have others that they can point to? Conversely, there's some things that I think sometimes companies who are hiring Agile coaches make mistakes in the sense that not being optimal because they look at certain things that I don't think are as important. One of the first things I think that a lot of folks will look at is certifications. Now, it's really interesting to me that I'm not saying that you don't go out and get certifications. I'm not saying that certifications don't matter. That's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is I don't think it should be a primary consideration for what you do, because the issue that we have, at least in the Agile world with certifications, is they're pretty easy to obtain. And it's hard to understand which certifications mean something and which certifications do not. Now, I know that a lot of folks will sometimes, put their certifications, everything up there. It's important, and they use it as a knockout, right? Because we're only going to choose from certified people because the pool's already big. But the best coaches I've worked with, even though they may have certifications, they don't publicly display them, and they don't generally refer to them all the time. So in my experience, and I was able to, in my last job, hire a great team of Agile coaches. I think some of the best coaches that I could find, and none of them that I recall really prominently talked about their certifications or displayed them. The other thing is we have a tendency in hiring all people to look for long tenures at companies. I don't think when it comes to an Agile coach that that's necessarily the best thing. I think having novel experiences with multiple companies, it far outweighs the kind of repetition that you might get if you've only worked for one or two companies as an Agile coach. And then the last thing I talked about recently on LinkedIn is don't look for bargain rates. I truly believe that the best Agile coaches will earn many times more than you pay him. I think that if you hire people on expense alone, and I think people are seeing today, because of the way that the market is, maybe I can get somebody cheaper. I don't think this is something that you want to be cheaper with. I think that sometimes the less expensive people are less expensive for a reason. Now, it doesn't mean just because you pay more, you're going to get a better experience. All I'm saying is don't weight the rate so high. Because a really good Agile coach will be somebody who pays for themselves again and again and again. So I want to, for those of you who care about such things, I wanted to just show this as a bullet point. And if you want to, you take a picture of it, whatever it is. So I just wanted to show that. I want to move on to my next topic. I want to talk a little bit about theory of constraints and some experience I've had with theory of constraints and why I think it's important in this world of HR. So I'm going to define theory of constraints. For those of you who don't know it, it comes to us from Elliot Goldratt. And he said, I read one definition. I don't know if it was from him or somebody else, but I love this definition. And we'll see it. I have a little video I'm going to show in a second, animation. Theory of constraints basically says any system can produce only as much as its critically constrained resource. Were it not so, the output of the system would tend to zero or infinity. And the question is, why would this really matter? And I'm going to show you a little video, and then I'm going to talk about it. And I think hopefully I can pull this together, why theory of constraints is an important thing when we consider hiring. So I want to show this video, and I show this in my class, so some folks may have seen this before. I want to show you this video of the theory of constraints. It comes from a group called Theory of Constraints Consortium Association or something like that. I don't even know if they're still in business, but I think it's a great animation that explains theory of constraints, and sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this system. We're going to talk about throughput, and throughput is an important concept, because throughput is really how much money are we going to make. How much are we going to put through the system? What do we have available to sell to our customers? And this is a very simple manufacturing or assembly type of assembly line procedure. And you'll notice that at each of these 5 stations, there's a different throughput. And what they're doing is they're creating, these screws or widgets or whatever. And you can see that each day, the throughput is equivalent to whatever is done at the constraint, which in this case is station number 3, and it's 10 items moved through. And you can see the inventory starting to pile up in front of station number 3. And you can also see that the person at station number 3 is getting quite tired at this point in time. And a little comedy as they cart this person off on a stretcher. And so this is the definition that I shared with you before, that a system can only produce as much as its critically constrained resource. Were it not so, the output of the system would tend to zero or infinity. And the interesting thing about this theory of constraints is, if you think about that, what we just looked at, and you think about that system where you have these 3 different places that the work can go, if I wanted to increase the output of the entire system from a kind of HR perspective, where do I need to work? And the answer is very simple. I need to do something, more than likely, do something at the 3rd station. And this may have an effect on hiring people. Where would I hire new people? I'd hire people who can maybe help out at station number 3, because that is the constraint in the system. If I hired anybody for stations 1, 2, 4, and 5 to try to increase the output of the system, what would happen? The answer is very simple. I'm still constrained by station number 3. So I could double the output at any of the other stations by, let's say, hiring people. And the throughput of the entire system would be completely unaffected. If anything, it might even get worse, right? So to me, this is kind of an HR type of understanding, is when we're trying to figure out who to hire, what skills to hire and what they should do. I think it's really important that we understand this rather simple. I think it's a rather simple concept. And I'm going to give you an example, because I think it shows an example of how this can be used in the real world. So a few years back, I was working at a particular place, and management came to me one day and said, hey, look, we're not getting what we think is enough throughput through this system. And this was a software development system. So we need to hire more software developers. And intuitively, that might make sense. If we're not delivering software fast enough, we need to hire more software developers. I said, hold on a second. Let's first confirm that this is a problem, because I think most of you know that software developers, at least they were a few years ago, I'm assuming it's still the same, they're rather expensive, worth it, but expensive. And they're sometimes really hard to find. It takes a long time to find them, and getting the right people takes time and money just to find them, and then you got to bring them up to speed, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, give me a little time. Let me take a look at what's going on. And one of the things that we did is we started to watch the work as it moved through the system, similar to what you saw in this very simple animation. And it wasn't long before we're able, usually you measure things like velocity or something like that. And there's all kinds of debates on whether you should or not. But if you follow things moving through the system, you can see where things are getting stuck in the system. And what we found, very simply, by just kind of following the work and paying attention, was it wasn't development of software that was the issue. We were developing software at a pretty good clip. It was the quality assurance that was done on the software where the constraint was. So hiring more software developers, I went back, to management and I said, look, if you hire more software developers, I don't think you're going to make any difference at all, because that's not your constraint. Your constraint is with the QA. You need one of two things that I can think of right off the top of my head. One, get some of your developers on the team to do more QA. They were kind of prima donnas. They didn't want to. They thought it was kind of beneath them, which was kind of strange. Or hire more QA people. And the interesting thing about that is that for the most part, QA people are generally a little bit easier to find than developers, and generally get paid a little bit less. So my ability to actually change and make the change and find somebody and get them employed and get them up to speed and helping the system was much, much cheaper. So again, it's a very simple concept, but I think it's really important that when we're looking at who we hire and where we put people, we need to understand we need to put people where the constraints are, or we need to figure out how to manage the constraints, or as Goldrat said, exploit the constraints. It may not just be hiring people. It may actually be slowing down the work that's upstream. There's all kinds of things we can do, but you cannot do those things until you start actually taking a look and saying, this is where we are. I want to get into my next topic, which is teams versus groups of people. I think a lot of you probably know this. I think if you're here watching this, that you're probably pretty hip on certain things, and I appreciate you spending some time with me. There's a big difference between teams and groups of people, and I've seen this, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, that folks sometimes confuse these things. When I think about teams and the concept of teams, one of the people that comes to mind is a gentleman named Richard Hackman. He's done a lot of work with that. I think he was at Harvard and pretty important guy. He wrote some books on this. The way you distinguish teams and groups of people is by the level of interdependence among the members. Now, remember, again, I like to think of myself as a systems guy. And the whole thing about systems is understanding how things work together. And it's the same with teams, because in a team, the individual members are highly interdependent, and they need close collaboration and coordination to achieve their goals. And this is really, really something that when we look at something like software development, or we look at knowledge work, is really, really important. But we can also even think about teams in terms of, and I use this analogy or a metaphor a lot, you can just think of sports teams, right? My favorite being American football. It's the collaboration and coordination of the people on the team that really count. And each one has their part to play, but they cannot play that part necessarily separately. You don't have all your quarterbacks on one field throwing the ball and all your receivers on another field catching the ball. It's the receiver and the quarterback working together. So when we talk about teams, we have to start looking at collective outcomes. And we have to look at the team's ability to work effectively together, because that's not necessarily the case. If we just had a group of individuals who had some interdependence, but didn't really share an outcome, where they were lone wolves, then the success is more about the individual contribution rather than the collective effort. And what Hackman says is just calling a group of people a team doesn't make them a team, nor does it make them effective as a team. In order to have effective team, we need structure, context, leadership, and development efforts, so that we can transform this group of individuals into a high-performing team. And I'm just going to talk briefly about Hackman's, what he called his 5 essential factors for team success, because I think they're really important, especially in this VUCA world. We need a team needs a clear and compelling direction. We need to know what our goals are, and we need to know what our motivation is, or what I would even say, not motivation, but inspiration is. And this is difficult because I don't know how many of you understand this, but complex knowledge work is really about feedback. And feedback is really about communication a lot of times. It's people talking to each other. It's people interacting with each other. And communication is really, really hard. In fact, there's a quote somewhere, and I'm not 100% who it was from, but the big problem with communication is assuming that it happened in the first place. And so we need to have very, very simple and clear directions provided to the team and clear inspiration. So what are the things that really matter? The next thing that's really important is having a supportive structure. I mean, you can think about the supportive structure as I often use the metaphor of a soil. You need to have a good soil. If you have the right seeds, but you put it on, you throw your seeds up on the concrete, it's not going to grow. So you need to have a supportive structure that is the good organizational context for the team to do the work, which is what I'm talking about. You need to create systems that support it. And you need to have a good mix of the team members. Another thing which I think is wonderful as an Agile coach that Hackman talks about is you need access to effective coaching and leadership. Leaders provide that crucial role of guidance. They help facilitate things. They provide support and structure. They provide the message. They help resolve any conflicts. And then the last thing he talks about is you need to focus on the team's development. And he doesn't talk about this, but I also would say that you have to focus on team incentives. It's one thing. We have a tendency in the work world to incentivize the individual. We have a tendency in the work world to praise the person who puts out fires. The problem that you have when you reward people who put out fires is you tend to get more fires because people want to be rewarded. So we don't want that. We don't need that hero culture. What we need is we need to get the team opportunities to develop and refine their working progress. And the interesting thing is, when I talk about 5 elements of a good Scrum team, one of the things I talk about is stability and dedication. We need that stability and dedication so that the team can come together, because the VUCA world is a team sport. It's not really an individual sport. And that's because it's unknowable in certain ways. But the more people that we bring with diversity of skills and experience, the better chance that we're going to have. I want to talk now about psychological safety. This is really important. I don't know if you all are familiar with the work, and if you haven't, I encourage you to Google it. Because it happened at Google, so it should be easy to find. Google did a study called Project Aristotle, and I learned about this, I don't know how many years, it's been a long time ago. Probably about 10 years ago, I actually ran into, when I was running the Job Hackers nonprofit, I ran into a gentleman who was part of Project Aristotle, and we talked about it. I used to always joke with him that I could have probably saved him some money, because what they did with Project Aristotle, and I'm going to be as precise as I can, so don't skew me if I get some of the minor details wrong, is they said, what is it about the best and highest performing teams at Google? What do these teams have in common, right? Because we want more of that, obviously. What do they have in common? So they spent a year or so looking at what I would consider the usual suspects. And those usual suspects were, how much was somebody being paid? What degree did they have? Did they have a master's or a PhD or just a BA? how many years were they doing the job? Those kind of things. And trust me, Google's really good with this stuff. I mean, they're a big data company. They crunch the numbers. They really couldn't find a whole bunch that these things had in common. And they spent a lot of time looking for them. And they said, there's got to be something there, right? There's got to be some reason for some teams performing at a higher level than other teams. And so they started to look at the softer skills. Somebody told me the other time that somebody calls them the crucial skills or something like that. There's a new term for it. I like it better. I mean, because the soft skills are not soft. I mean, they're hard to do. And I would have, this is where I said I would have saved them some money, because I would have had them look there first, because years ago there was a book called Peopleware where I learned a lot about how knowledge workers are different. And Peopleware found something pretty similar to Project Aristotle. Anyway, what did they find in Project Aristotle? Well, they finally did, when they started looking at what we consider the softer skills, they finally did five things that correlate well with the highest performing teams. And if you're in HR and you don't know these things front and back, you need to, because it's really important. I think part of your job is to ensure that we have high performing teams. I could be wrong. The first thing that they found, and the most prevalent thing that they found, the one that had the most influence on highest performing teams was this thing that they called psychological safety. And really what psychological safety is in a nutshell, and you can look up and probably find a better definition, is, do people feel comfortable with other people on the team? Can they be, as some folks say these days, can they be their authentic selves, right? Can they say things and not worry that what they say is going to have some kind of retribution? Can they speak their mind? Can all folks do it? The way I think about it is, if you have a team that's well functioning, then usually there's a lot of laughter. So that's always one thing to look for, by the way, because we feel safe, right? Because sometimes humor is, if you ever meet somebody, usually you don't talk about things that are humorous right away. You need to get to know people first. So psychological safety is really, really important. And creating an environment within which people can feel safe is important, which is, again, I go back to this blog post I wrote years ago about 5, things that all good Scrum teams have, or 5 things to look out for good Scrum teams. Small, dedicated, stable, right? Cross-functional, etc. These are things that bring psychological safety. Co-located is one I keep stumbling over. These 5 things bring psychological safety with them. If we create teams that are that way, over time, they're going to get comfortable with each other. And the more comfortable they get with each other, the higher they do perform. Now, there's some things also that go along with it. And this is something that I've seen that you have to be careful with, is because there's such an emphasis, I've seen at least, in the public on psychological safety, we forget that they learned 4 other things that are important. And those 4 other things I'm going to go through a little bit quickly is dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact. And the interesting thing about that is structure and clarity goes back to one of the things that Hackman was talking about. We need to know what it is that we're shooting for. What are our goals? What really matters? What can we do without asking, permission? What can we do? What are our parameters? What are our guidelines? So that we can make decisions that are more effective and quicker. Because I'm a big believer that when we look at the concept of agility, one of the things that's really, really important is it's about making decisions better and faster. So if we have to always go back up the chain, then that's a problem. Obviously, you need dependability. I need to be able to depend on my teammates and vice versa. So there's that kind of accountability that's part of it. It's not just like everybody do whatever they want to. And then the last 2, meaning and impact, are just so important. When I start my training, one of the very first things I talk about, and this is Simon Sinek, and some of you are familiar with him, I talk about why. Because why is really important. Why speaks to our emotions. It speaks to our motivations. It speaks to who we are as individuals. We need to know that what we're doing has an impact on the world. We need to know that what we do means something. And when we have that, we're more engaged in our work. And when we're more engaged in our work, we're higher performing. So all of these things and some of the things I've talked about together, obviously, they go together. I want to talk a little bit about the knowledge world versus the physical world, because, and I've alluded to it before, but I just want to kind of just put a pin in it just briefly. We need to acknowledge the fact that knowledge workers are fundamentally different than physical workers. I think we know that. I think intuitively we know that. But the thing that I've seen more often than not is we don't act like we know it. We treat knowledge workers often the same way we treat physical workers. Let me give you one example. And for those who are interested in this topic, there are 2 books that I teach in my class on this, and I encourage you to reach out for them, which is Peopleware, which is written Tom DeMarco, Timothy Lister, many, many years ago, and Drive by Dan Pink. And one of the examples that Dan Pink uses in Drive is that once we start doing things that are knowledge work, intellect work, I think they refer to intellect work in Peopleware, it's different. It's non-deterministic versus deterministic. And people are motivated differently. This is the example that Pink uses. People who are doing things in a physical world, physical is things that we really as human beings don't really want to do. We might, but really after a while you just don't want to. You become tired, you become fatigued, you become bored, whatever the case may be. So you have to be incentivized. This is where this old term of carrot and stick comes in. We need either a carrot. You know, you're going to produce more stuff. You're going to dig more ditches. We're going to give you more money. Or we need the stick. If you're not digging enough ditches, we're going to fire you or we're going to do something, right? That works. It's highly motivating in the physical world because we need that motivation. Because we're not intrinsically motivated to do things repetitively. We're not intrinsically motivated to do things that are highly physical in nature. Knowledge work is completely different. Knowledge workers are intrinsically motivated. Their motivation comes from inside themselves. So we, as leaders, I'm not going to say the word managers, physical workers need to be managed. I think knowledge workers need to be led. And I think there's a difference between them. So we as leaders in this knowledge world, we need to accept the fact that we cannot motivate people. They are intrinsically motivated. It's either there or not. Carrot and stick don't work. There's studies. There's a whole bunch of studies. If you again, look to Drive or other places, you can see how it just doesn't seem to work well in the knowledge world, in the intellect world. So what we need to do is we need to inspire people. This gets back to what Google was talking about. Provide meaning. Get people to understand the impact that they have. This is leadership to me. This is inspiration. This isn't motivation. The one thing that I can say is if you try to manage intellect workers, you can demotivate them rather easily because you can make it about the carrot and the stick. And that's not necessarily what it is. In the knowledge world, people need to be paid. We all need to eat. But once you take that off of the table, once that becomes a non-issue, that people have enough money to do their job, then what are we going to concentrate on? We're going to concentrate on self-fulfillment. We're going to concentrate on something that has meaning. We're going to concentrate on things that have an impact. Those things are highly motivating for people because they come from the inside. This is who we are as human beings. I want to talk a little bit then about incentives and something of annual reviews. Most of you are familiar with annual reviews, right? Your company, every year you have to fill out an annual review for your employees, the people who report to you. If you're an employee, you have people that you have to fill out your annual review, and you go over it with your boss. And that's going to determine, in some cases, your bonus. It's going to determine whether you get more money in salary, et cetera, et cetera. There's a problem with annual reviews, and I wrote about it many, many years ago. So if you're interested, the blog post, a little tongue-in-cheek, was in September of 2015. So this has been, almost 10 years ago I wrote this. And it was about Accenture. There's an article in one of the business journals or something like that said Accenture is ending the annual review. And they acted like they came up with this, wonderful, miraculous thing. And they're so progressive. But the problem is it's not progressive. We have known for a very long time that annual reviews don't do what they're supposed to do, because the purpose of the annual review is to basically get people, to motivate people to do a better job, right? To either keep, if they're doing well, to keep doing well, or to improve their output if they're not doing well. All right. Still, again, kind of carrot and stick thing. And they don't really work very well. And we found that over the years. So the blog post I put, Accenture ends annual review, and then in parentheses, and amidst the Earth orbits the sun, because this is something we already knew. Right? This is not something that to me was newsworthy. Now it's probably kind of jerky title, a little bit tongue in cheek, but still, regardless. And there's a couple quotes I'm going to leave you with just on this thing. Daniel Pink, I was talking about him earlier in his book Drive, has this quote: performance reviews are rarely authentic conversations. More often, they are the West's form of kabuki theater, highly stylized rituals in which people recite predictable lines in a formulaic way and hope the experience ends very quickly. I know this to be true. When I talk to people about this subject in companies, very often, I'll have a big group of people that'll be in my training. I'll say, hey, raise your hand if you enjoy the annual review process. Nobody raises their hand. The employees don't raise their hand. The managers don't raise their hand. Nobody likes it, but we do it anyway. I mean, it's just really interesting. Why would we continue to do things anyway, even if we know they don't work? One of the people that I admire a lot is W. Edward Deming. Way back in 1986, he wrote a book called Out of the Crisis, where he talks about what he calls the deadly diseases of companies. And the annual review is deadly disease number 3. And this is what he said about the annual review. The performance appraisal nourishes short-term performance, annihilates long-term planning, builds fear, demolishes teamwork, nourishes rivalry and politics. It leaves people bitter, crushed, bruised, battered, desolate, despondent, dejected, feeling inferior, some even depressed, unfit for work for weeks after receiving a rating, unable to comprehend why they are inferior. It is unfair as it ascribes to people in a group differences that may be totally caused by something about the system that they work in. And this is something that you all probably have felt before. How many things on your annual review and the things that you're being graded for do you even have control over? And the answer is probably very few. They just don't work. In their place, what I would like to see is you don't need an annual review, because you and the person who is helping you and leading you and guiding you, who you report to, and that's what a leader does. You should be having these conversations all the time. There should be no, even if you had an annual review, there should be no surprises. Again, in the VUCA world, we need frequent, accurate, and actionable feedback. And an annual review doesn't provide any of those things. And moreover, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Think about it this way. If you're a high performer you're doing it because there's something in you that wants to perform well. It's who you are. And you may get a 3% raise because that's the highest raise that's available that year. And then, next to you, you got this person who's really not doing a very good job. And what do they get? Maybe they get a 1% because that's, ostensibly a punishment. The difference is minuscule. That 1% raise is not going to, or the 0% or whatever, is not going to get that low performer to perform better. And the 3% raise is certainly not going to, when I look at it in terms of other people and what they're doing, it's not going to get me to do anymore if I'm a high performer. Something it's time has come, and we probably need to get rid of it. I got one more thing here I want to talk about. I want to talk about the role of training and creating a learning organization. And for this, again, I usually have books and ideas, things that people can refer to. In this one, in my class, I use Peter Senge's Fifth Discipline. He talks about how do we create a learning organization. He's a systems guy. I really enjoy the book. And it's important that we do this because, again, it may be obvious, but this is our tool right here. We're knowledge workers. And in order for us to continue to be productive, and by productive, I mean value delivered over time. For knowledge workers to continue to deliver more value over time, we have to feed our brains because the world is constantly changing. And if we don't keep up, we still may have output, but the value of that output is going to go down because we're building for a world that no longer exists. And the world is changing so quickly, we have to keep up with it. Think about AI and how much it can help productivity of your employees. Are you giving them the time to figure it out? Are you providing classes? Are you providing training? Are you testing it to see what you should and shouldn't do and can and cannot do? And when you do find out things that you can do, how are you providing that to your employees? The amount of time and energy that we spend in training is not commensurate with the world we live in. It's not commensurate with the VUCA world. We need to spend and invest time in training. And you should have a position about that as an organization. You should say that X% of our time is going to be spent in learning new things. And if you don't, you're going to fall behind. In Senge, he talks about in order to become a successful learning organization, a company must pursue 5 separate but interconnected disciplines. And these 5 are, and I believe this is in the order as well that he takes in the book. 1, personal mastery. We all need to be able to master what we do as individuals. And again, our jobs are constantly changing. If you're an Agile coach, you know that. If you've been a coach for a while, Agile coaching didn't exist when I was in college. It wouldn't. I don't know if you can still take a class and get a degree in Agile coaching. Mental models, which I love. You have to spend time helping people with new mental models because they determine how we see the world. And the third thing is building a shared vision, helping people to see what you see. If you're a leader, that is a big part of your job, is getting people to see the things that you see. The fourth thing is team learning. We must learn together as a team. This is something that's built into agility. If you look at Scrum, I mean, we talk about good Scrum teams and keeping people together and learning together. When I work with Scrum teams, a lot of times I'll ask them, what are we going to invest in education and training? Every week, how much, what is it, 10, 20%? And I did relentless learning. Is one of the reasons I continue to do this is I do it now for the public, but every company I've been in, we did relentless learning. And the last company I was in, we did it every day for an hour. So you had that opportunity to make that investment on a regular basis. The last of the 5 things is systems thinking. Systems thinking is critical because things like theory constraints is systems thinking. How does making changes to the system affect the overall system? one of the things that we run into in this agile world is a lot of people are making promises to organizations that you're going to make this agile transformation, and then you're going to have, these wonderful things happen, and they're not happening. Because part of the reason they're not happening is sometimes all we're doing is we're working with teams. And it's not that we don't want to work with teams. It's that it's not the only thing that we need to do. We need to look at the entire organization. Because if I optimize a team, I can do so at the expense of the entire system, especially if they're not the constraint. There may be a team within the organization that's a constraint. I should spend my time there. I have to look at the entire flow of the work through the system. And we don't always do that. So systems thinking is so critically important to what we're doing. And again, this is something that I think is, again, HR related. Again, you might not agree. There's huge benefits that Senge talks about, and I think you probably can intuit, when we create what he calls a learning organization, one that has these 5 disciplines: adaptability and flexibility. If you have people who are capable and trained to make better decisions, then your organization is going to be able to respond quicker to the challenges and opportunities that are here in this competitive and VUCA world. You're going to have enhanced innovation, because when you have that kind of freedom of learning things, you're going to be able to make connections that you wouldn't have been able to make before. And you're going to be able to innovate. And one innovation is worth so much money in the world, right? I mean, look at the companies that we admire that are the tops of what they do in the world, and they make the most money. How many different products do they have? Google. Why is Google so, and now it's Alphabet, but why are they so preeminent? It's still search, right? Because they had a better algorithm. They did a better job of providing search results. Now it's kind of debatable these days. But that's why they were able to make so much more money, and they were able to pivot, and they were able to build on top of that. What does Apple have? Apple, if you look in the history of Apple, not only did we have the Mac, which was the big launch after Steve Jobs came back, when Apple almost died. And now what is Apple? Second most capitalized company in the history of the world, right? NVIDIA. They have certain innovations in how they make chips that allow us to do all this AI stuff, right? So, innovation provides so much to the company's bottom line, but have we created a culture where that can happen? What else? Improved employee engagement and retention. Employees who are learning all the time, they're engaged in what they do. They're going to see the company as better. They're going to see the company as somebody who cares in them as an individual and cares about their opportunities for personal and professional growth. And what it's going to lead to, which is the most important thing of all, is if we make these investments in creating a learning organization, we're going to have a much, much better long-term performance. It's just that simple. These things need to be integrated into the fabric of an organization's culture. And in order to become a learning organization, this is something, and again, I think this is an HR thing, but we need the organization to be dedicated and persistent and have a willingness to experiment and learn from mistakes. Because the thing about the VUCA world, which I probably mentioned before, is that you don't know how things are going to happen. It's a non-deterministic world. You can't just pull a lever and understand how the machine's going to work. It's much too complex for that. And the world is changing around it much too quickly to really understand whether what you do is going to, be successful or not successful. So the ability to experiment, understand experimentation, and take the feedback from experimentation and use it within your organization is huge. Because it is how we're going to thrive in the VUCA world, not just merely survive it. And some companies won't, right? Because they don't have that ability, because they become too top-heavy and bureaucratic, and they see the world in ways that are deterministic. And that's just not right when you're in a non-deterministic world, when you're in the VUCA world. So it's a lot of talking on my part. I appreciate those folks who have made it through to the end. And if you have any questions, I know there's been some stuff in the comments that I want to get to. So we'll do that now. And if anybody has any other things they can put in the comments, we'll get to them now. This is a great time for it. I see that there was some, as I was talking before, it's kind of tough to do all this stuff, but I want to get to one from Alan Daly. Alan, known for quite a good long time. Alan Daly says, I know some great passionate coaches that don't have public things. Take that idea with a grain of salt. I agree. There doesn't necessarily have to be public things if you're passionate about what you do. But if you are passionate about what you do, you probably have them. So, I mean, it's not a guarantee, but it is something to look for. And I still think it's, in some cases, more important than looking at things like certification, some other things that I would consider, in this case, usual suspects. But I think, yeah, it's not the only thing, right? If somebody has a public persona, here's another thing too. Do you agree with them? I mean, does that public persona, is it something that's going to work for your organization? Sometimes it could be a curse. Every blessing can be a curse, I suppose. From Andy, down in San Mateo, he says, hiring cheaply extends the Scrum Master role as well. I agree. When I look at the Scrum Master role, and I talk about the Agile Coach role, to me, they're pretty much the same thing. Scrum Masters are coaches within the organization, and they're coaches, at the team level, and they can also be coaches at the organizational level. And they should be, I think, experts in agility, and hopefully not just Scrum, because I mean, it's not just Scrum Masters, but sometimes we call them Agile leads or something like that, if we're not doing Scrum. But yeah, you don't want to be cheap, because again, it's the ability for people who have these types of positions to influence teams in the organization to delivering more value. And it's a lot of value, by the way. One of the things I said, when we talk about Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and their ability to influence the company's bottom line, you have to ask yourself the question, okay, what does that mean? I mean, how much can they influence the bottom line? And I think the upside is huge. But I've often said, if you listen to your coaches, then they're probably underpaid. And I don't mean listen in the sense, because somebody came back to me one time when I said that, they came back and said, oh, you mean that they have to do what you said? That's not what I mean. I'm not saying they have to obey. I'm just saying it's good if they listen. If somebody in a position of authority and power in an organization sits down with me, I can help them to see the world differently. It's going to help them. They're going to make probably better decisions in this VUCA world, and that can make a lot of money for somebody. So if you listen to an Agile coach, they're probably underpaid. If you don't listen to them, they're probably the most overpaid person on your payroll. And the same thing extends to a Scrum Master. If they are able to influence teams well, they're underpaid. It's not, I don't think it's as much as a matter. I mean, the market's going to determine to a certain degree what people get paid. But again, don't look for necessarily the cheapest person you can buy. Mike Lyons joined us here. He says, and we were talking about the theory of constraints I was showing in the video. He says, if you boosted station number 3, then the constraint would just move down the line to the next slowest station. Correct. Absolutely. You're a good student. You learned. Yeah, the thing about the constraints is they always exist, right? Because the interesting thing about Goldratt is he didn't get a master's in business. Oh, maybe he got a master's in business, but his background was in physics. And you can see it from that statement that if there weren't constraints in the system, the output would tend to infinity or zero, which is basically a way of saying that the constraint is friction. If you pay attention to physics, because without friction, you have inertia, or you have a thing where without friction it's just going to go on, infinitely. And that's the kind of the physics speaking through that statement. And so there's always going to be a constraint. So as soon as you fix it, there's 5 focusing steps. And I think it's the 5th one. It says, okay, once you finish the first 4, which is, identifying the constraint, exploiting the constraint, subordinating to the constraint. I'll probably miss one in there. But when you get to the 5th one, it's say, okay, now that you've done those other 4 and you fix the constraint, go look for the new one. Because in that example, I think the output of the system was 10. So if I doubled the output at station number 3, I'm not going to double the output of the system. I'm only going to increase the output of the system up into whatever the next constraint is, which in this case, I believe was 14 in that example that I used. So I'm going to increase, so I'm going to double the, what I pay if I put 2 people there. Let's just assume that's my way of doing it. If I put 2 people there and double that throughput, I've only increased the efficacy or the throughput of the system by 40% by doubling the number of people there. And then I'd have to work on whatever that next station is that is next on the list, which is, I think, is 14. Okay. Last chance, folks. I appreciate you all being with me. We had, I could see how many people we have. At one point, I think we had about 30, 40 people. And I appreciate you spending some time with me. Hopefully this was helpful. I want to be helpful. If you have any other questions, now's your last chance. If not, what we're going to do is we'll wrap this thing up a little bit early, let people get out there and enjoy their weekend. There's one thing that I do want to put out there. If you look into the comments, one of the comments that I put in before the show, there's a whole bunch of links. And I want you to, if you're interested, take a look at those links before I let you all go. And I want you to understand that there's many different ways you can get a hold of me. So one of those ways is through my website. I've got my email address there. I've got a YouTube channel. And the great thing about the YouTube channel is that there's a lot of my training there. So if you're curious about the training, you can see how I've gone through it. I took a class that I did with the Agile MBA some time ago, put it up there. LinkedIn, if we're not linked in together, please do that. My calendar, get on my calendar. That would be great. I mean, I would love to have you get on my calendar and spend some time with me. And then the last thing, I guess, that I want to put out there is there's some links to some of the testimonials. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I have some really good testimonials, specifically when we talk about things like the VUCA MBA in my training. And the VUCA MBA is meant for businesses. So if you work for a business and you like what you're hearing, let's talk. So I can bring in my training to your organization. I think it's really critical. And if you're an Agile coach, you say, well, this guy's my competition. I'm not your competition. My training helps when we talk about building that soil, that fertile soil with which we can plant the seeds. That's what my training does. And it helps you as a coach. It makes your job easier. There's a testimonial that I have from Tom Malash. It says, basically when I was doing coaching in your organization where you gave people training, I could tell the ones that took your training, they were easier to coach.